Hoy en día vivimos rodeados de todo tipo de dispositivos, celulares, relojes, computadoras, camaritas incorporadas. Todos estos dispositivos incluyen una increíble cantidad de sensores. Hacer que los dispositivos funcionen bien es extremadamente difícil. Esto es lo que estudian los sistemas autónomos. A continuación, hablamos con Chien de la NASA. Okay, hi Steve, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Let me start asking you, how would you introduce yourself?
I would introduce myself as I'm a scientist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is part of NASA, the United States Space Agency.
Okay, and what did you study? Are you a computer scientist or electrical engineer? And what's your background?
I studied computer science in school, and since I've been with NASA, I've actually had the chance to learn a lot more about more of the pure sciences. I've actually recently learned a lot about volcanology and more just in the last 3 years about comets and the evolution of the solar system.
So when we think about NASA, we always think about rocket science and going to space and all these things. When you were 16 or 17 years old, did you thought of being an astronaut or going to space or things like that?
Interestingly enough, when I was a child, I didn't really think so much about, what I might do as my occupation. I think to me the main thing is I wanted to make a difference.
Okay, and when you say making the difference, is making difference in what? What kind of things interested you when you were 15 years old, 16, 17?
When I was that age, I was interested in very many things. I was interested in sports quite a bit. I was interested in economics and understanding how sort of the world worked and markets worked. But I was also very interested in science and chemistry, biology, and engineering. My father was an engineer, so I had some view into what that might be like. But as far as making a difference, I think I've always wanted to work on things that can make a better place for everybody, not so much maybe just make money or something like that.
And how did you choose computer science? Who did you talk to you with? Did you have a teacher that told you about computer science? Why computer science and maybe not mathematics or physics or electrical engineering, whatever you...
There's kind of an interesting story there. When I was a child in 5th grade, 6th grade, I actually was very interested in computers, starting with playing some computer games and then writing computer programs when I was in 5th and 6th grade, so when I was 10 or 11 years old. And nowadays in the United States, that's actually quite common, but when this happened, this was 1975 perhaps, and that was quite unusual. But then when I went to school, when I was an undergraduate, I was interested in many, many things. So I was very interested in studying languages. I studied French language in high school and won a scholarship to study in France, but as an American teenager, I was more interested in playing basketball for the high school team than traveling to France. So only now do I look back on that and say, how could I think that? But as an undergraduate, I was interested in perhaps studying French language, also physics, and also economics. But somehow I stayed with computer science more because I think I had a very long interest in it.
And how did you get to the NASA? So you started computer science, and how did you manage to get to NASA to work in the propulsion laboratory?
So when I was in graduate school, there was an individual, someone from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who was actually studying for his PhD at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Richard Doyle. And he visited the University of Illinois, where I went to school. And he met different graduate students. And so then when I graduated, I remembered that visit, and I sent him an email And then I ended up being at JPL. And originally, I thought I would probably be there for a few years and then go off and be a professor somewhere. But I've had so much fun. It's now more than 20 years, and I'm still there.
Which were your first activities when you started working at JPL? How did you start your computer science career?
Actually, at JPL, I had a very interesting first project. So I worked on the environmental control and life support system for the space station. But my brother used to make fun of me. He used to tell me that I worked on the air conditioner in the toilet for the space station.
And how does a computer scientist work on environmental issues or air conditioning?
So all of the environmental system on the space station, it has to be controlled. And so that control is in software. So it has to know when it is working correctly, when it is not working correctly. It has to know when the air has gone long enough that it needs to be cleaned again. It has to monitor the processing of the water. And so when people use the water, it has to store the water, know when there's enough stored that it needs to clean it, so they have water to drink and water to bathe with and clean with. And one of the initiation rites on this project was you would go there and they would make you drink this water. And this water that they have you drink is recycled water. So it's basically from the toilet and the shower. And so you have to trust your software, and you have to trust the system in order to drink this water.
And you tried it?
Of course.
And how was it?
It tasted like iodine, but other than that, it was okay. So very similar to when you go backpacking in the mountains and you have to treat your water.
And did you have the opportunity to try different kind of recycled waters from your programs while you were optimizing the recycling? Or
no, I think once was enough for me.
How did your history on autonomous systems change in these 25 years with all the technological revolution?
So oftentimes what might seem on the outside that it's a technological revolution, that it's something that is very sudden, it's more the result of a lot of people working continuously on a problem for quite a long time. So from the inside, it doesn't really look like a revolution. It looks like people work very hard and they make very small progress, but then you look back at the end of 20 years and it's quite a difference. So when I first came to NASA, we would tell people, well, maybe we can make this airplane autonomous, or we can make this spacecraft autonomous, and people never believe you. But slowly, we make these smaller steps. So first, we make the spacecraft able to understand better what it's seeing, but not perhaps act on it. And more recently, people are very interested in autonomous systems because they understand how much benefit they can have to science, to humanity, to people. And so now we see these autonomous systems able to monitor different kinds of events, volcanoes, wildfires, flooding, and help the lives of people all around the world.
Did you have the chance of working with anthropomorphic robots, or similar to, let's say, little robot like dogs or things like that? Or everywhere where you work, you were always working with spacecraft or things like that?
So many of the people in artificial intelligence have the opportunity to work with robots that are like humans. I have not really had that opportunity, and that is both a positive and a negative. So when you work with robots that should interact like humans, should interact with people like humans, it is, in some sense, the greatest challenge, because humans are the most intelligent entities that we have on this planet. And so in order for me to interact with you, I have to understand how people normally interact. We need to understand social rules and conventions. So that is a particular, what I would call, specialty of artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence has made great strides in having these systems that can interact with people and even treat people medically. So there are systems that work with soldiers who've come back from the war and help to interact with them and counsel them. There are systems that you can ask for help and they understand your questions and how to explain things to you. For my work, I've worked more with systems that are nothing like people. So a spacecraft is nothing like a person in the sense that it has no hands, it has no feelings. It's supposed to just do its job. And so to me, that's easier, but sort of a different problem.
How far do you think we are from these, let's say, autonomous systems like HAL that can talk with people that almost have feelings and free will, if you want?
That's a very good question, and it's a very hard one to answer, because things like free will and consciousness, they're very hard to define even among people. And computers are very different from people. So when people say things like computers are intelligent, it's very hard to understand what they mean. Computers are much better than people at some things, and they're much worse. So computers are very good at dealing with numbers. They're very good at dealing with large amounts of data. And they're very good at doing the same thing very methodically. So they do not make mistakes when they are able to do one particular task. People are almost the opposite of that. People are very flexible. People can deal with new situations. And so when you ask questions like, will a computer be conscious? Is a computer alive? I think we're only now understanding what it means to be alive. I think there's a lot more science where we have to understand what different kinds of intelligence might exist. To me, this is very similar to if we went to another star and another planet and we encountered another intelligence, another intelligent life form. It is very unlikely that that intelligent life form would be like us, in that it would talk, in that it would have feelings. It would be potentially quite different. And I think we can learn a lot from studying different animals. Things like octopuses, octopi, they actually have feelings. They can actually communicate with people. They express their feelings through their coloration and things like that. And people have understood that different of these animals have different personalities. And so one must have a very broad definition of life before one can understand those questions.
Do you think the AI community is working on ethical issues that trying to control or regulate or think about what could happen if in the next 10 or 20 years computers would start to have a consciousness or free will, or at least action possibilities that could harm society or whatever?
That's a very good question. So computer software already controls many, many parts of our lives, ranging from our finances to medical things that impact us very much. I think what's going to change in the future is that the degree of freedom that computer software has and how that degree of freedom affects our lives is expanding every second, every moment. And the challenge will be both for us to understand how this software works and also for people to adjust. A great example is right now, when I receive so many emails in one day, I actually can't possibly look at all of them. So I rely on my software to tell me what is the junk mail, what's coming from one particular project, what's coming from another particular project. So I rely on that software for a big part of my work, and that's a change. That's a change in the past where maybe I would look at less email, I would receive less email, or I would have an assistant to do that. And so these changes are happening in our lives every day, and it's a question of understanding them, and understanding what it means.
So it seems like you are losing freedom instead of winning it. How do you manage with that contradiction about freedom and let computers do what maybe you should do or you want to do?
That's a very good point, and that's really at the heart of the issue. So there's two ways to look at this. One way to look at it is that is a choice that is being removed from me, and so you emphasize that point. But I would think about it the other way. I'm being liberated from looking at all of this email, and so I can focus on the more important issues, the bigger issues in my life, than sorting through, 100 emails from this particular type. And I think that, like most technologies, we can view this in exactly those two different ways. For example, my cellular phone. I can view it as, well, it gives me the ability to connect to people all around the world, no matter where I am. Or I can look at it as, that enables all of these people to intrude in my life and I cannot escape from them. So all of these things, there are two sides to them, and that's what I meant when I said we have to learn how to coexist with this technology, and we have to learn how to adapt our lives to thrive with this technology.
And typically we wake up and we instantly take the phone and check messengers or email, and then we go on vacations, we go to the mountain and we are looking for signal everywhere. How do you manage to have holidays, for example, with this extremely persistent resource you have in your pocket?
Well, that's very easy for me because my wife would insist and she's the boss. But I understand very much what you're talking about because I had a recollection where I was hiking at Machu Picchu to the Gate of the Sun, and I hiked up there, and there were all these people who were hiking in the other direction from the Inca Trail, and they were arriving at Machu Picchu, with this beautiful view of this ancient Incan city. And my experience was quite unique because instantly I heard all of their cell phones ringing because there's cell coverage there at Machu Picchu, and they didn't have it on the Inca Trail, so they all had voicemail. So I certainly understand what you're saying. We need to set boundaries, understand how the technology interacts with our lives, and I think we can joke about cell phones, but you're absolutely right. As these kinds of autonomous systems technologies and artificial intelligence, whatever that means, as they grow and grow, those decisions and those impacts on our lives will be becoming more and more complex and harder to decide. I would say a great example of that is video games today. One could say, what is the impact of video games on people's lives these days? And some people would say, oh, it's great. I can play these multiplayer video games with people all around the world. One of my best playing partners was in Liechtenstein when I was playing one of these video games. But I could also look at it the other side and say, why would I ignore the real world and sit in some room in front of my computer?
Well, maybe that's the case of Facebook, no? So Mark Zuckerberg, in the film you see that he created Facebook to socialize with their partners in Harvard, I think it was. So maybe the creation of many of these huge social networks comes from trying to grow our social capabilities when you are not able to do it face to face, or you just don't want it, or you can.
Yes, and I think that's a great example. So Facebook allows you to disseminate information very broadly. It enables you to, for example, I reconnected with my friends from high school who I hadn't seen in 20, 30 years. It enables me to stay in touch with some of my friends all around the world, and they can hear about me being on television in Argentina or something like that. On the other hand, you're absolutely right. And maybe if that takes me away from dealing with people face to face, that's not such a good thing.
Have you been working on autonomous systems, how to control this massive amount of sensors in the well-being of users?
I've worked on something that's very closely related to that. We've worked on sensor webs for environmental monitoring. So just as you're talking about the cell phones and maybe there being hundreds of sensors in your house or your car, we've worked to put hundreds of sensors on volcanoes, hundreds of sensors all over the rivers so we can see when they're flooding, sensors on trees and in the ecosystem so that we can see where the ecosystem is growing and shrinking. However, there are some similarities and there are some differences. The similarities are, instead of having one smart thing and controlling everything else, you now have this mass or this swarm of entities, each of which alone may or may not be smart. And the interesting thing is the emergent behavior that comes out of these let's say, not totally stupid entities. And so I think in the future, that's going to be one of the challenges with the Internet of Things. In the near term, there's a challenge of computer security. As we all know, it's very common to have problems when somebody breaks into your computer and steals information, or people steal information about your credit cards. When everything in the world is connected in the Internet of Things, that's a tremendous challenge. You don't want people breaking into your car and controlling it, particularly not when you're driving it, things like that. So that's the near-term challenge, and then the long-term challenge is to make sure that these machines don't interact in a way that causes a big problem, such as a traffic jam or something like that.
And if you have 17 years again, would you choose computer science and NASA and JPL, or would you try different ways?
That's a very interesting question. I would have two reactions to that. So perhaps I'm unusual, but I've never really enjoyed, in most of my life, I've never really enjoyed any time more than the present. And that's been true for most of my life. I'm always so much enjoying where I am, learning more, wherever I am in my life. So I would probably say I wouldn't change anything. I've been able to do so many things that I never really thought I would have the chance to do. I never thought I would be walking all over volcanoes in Iceland. I never thought I would be tracking flooding in Thailand. I never thought I would be able to do some of these amazing things. And so for me, I wouldn't change anything.
And for children 17 and 16, 18 years old, thinking about technological degrees, let's say computer science, electrical engineering, which one would you recommend, or how would you explain how beautiful this is?
To me, it's all about making a difference in the world. And so that's always been a continuing theme in my life. So science, engineering, they're all understanding and learning more about the world in which we live. And this is great just for general scientific knowledge. But to me, the most important thing is to grow and improve the world that we live in. So understanding science can help people to live longer, healthier lives. It can help people to understand the world we live in so that more people have access to water, to land, they can eat better foods. To me, that's what it's all about. And science and technology, that's what enables this to happen. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded of is if we lived 100 years ago. If we lived 100 years ago, the world is a very different place. I was born with different conditions regarding my eyesight. It would have been a very difficult life for me. For many people, medical issues would make it quite different. If I was born 100 years ago, it's very unlikely I would be here in Buenos Aires, able to enjoy and learn more about the beautiful Argentinian culture, enjoy the food and the sights here.
And just to close the interview, which are the three or the most interesting challenges you are focusing in the next years?
So to me, we're looking at taking intelligence that we've put in one spacecraft or one rover, and we're trying to make it on a swarm or a fleet of spacecraft or rovers. And that's just a completely different game. It's very, very hard to get one entity to work intelligently. But now when you have several, they can interact in some way, and understanding how they interact. Just like getting one person to do a job, training one person to do a job is one thing, but getting a team of people to work together, that's a totally different thing.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and I expect we have it again in Buenos Aires around maybe Dancing Tango or for another conference. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.